spicy when we brought on two legends of Iron Bowl's past. You will not believe what a two-time national champ had to say about how the Crimson Tide actually viewed the Auburn game. And Travis Hunter or Jeremiah Smith, who was the better prospect coming out of high school? How about Trevor Lawrence or Arch Manning? We debate the best high school prospect over the last 8 years. Plus, should Carson Beck regret his decision to transfer from Georgia? We're not touching his personal life. This is strictly about on-field supporting cast. All that and more as the ultimate college football show starts right now. Welcome into the ultimate college football show. He's Cooper Petagna. I'm Emily Proud, and I just laid out. We got a lot of stuff to talk about on today's show, but what are you most looking forward to?
I would say a little bracketology, March Madness, with our friend Greg Biggins. Going to talk about some of the former number one prospects in all of high school football. So I'm excited about that. That gets me pretty fired up.
I know, and we do not agree on the bracket, which means I get to be the deciding vote, which should scare you or excite you. I don't know, but stay tuned. Let's start now, though, with our opening kick. Per Front Office Sports, California powerhouse High School Mater Dei has made history by agreeing to a 10-year media rights deal with PlayFi Sports worth up to $1 million per year. This further professionalizing amateur sports and high school sports. And in order to talk about Mater Dei, we should go to our SoCal representative and bring on national recruiting analyst Greg Biggins to give us a little bit more detail about this. But Greg, I want to know, what does this mean for the athletes? You see a figure like $1 million. Is any of that getting down to them?
I mean, maybe long-term wise, I'll be honest, I didn't do a super deep dive into this whole contract thing. It sounds like it's going to be, opportunities for the school itself to brand itself better, which in turn obviously helps out the athletes long-term. So obviously you can't have NIL deals through a high school in Southern California right now, or California in general. So again, just kind of reading up on it a little bit. Not a surprise, it's Mater Dei. They're the first ones out here who started selling season tickets for high school football and basketball. Their tailgates, which again, reading the contract, is supposed to be, kind of making it more festive. I've already been to many Mater Dei pregame tailgates. They already pop off like a college tailgate. So I'm kind of curious to see what it does. I don't know, again, talking specifically about the athlete, I don't know if it's going to be money in their pocket, but who knows? Maybe down the road, an extra exposure can only help them, right?
Yeah, to Greg's point, I think the extra exposure point for Mater Dei, who is a powerhouse nationally, not just there in California, but you think about them attracting some of the best student athletes from across the country, the teams that they play. We've seen in the past Bishop Gorman, IMG Academy, St. Thomas Aquinas. So the best of the best play at Mater Dei in California. If you're one of these guys, maybe you can't leverage that as a high school student athlete currently, but what that means in the future for a school that is certainly trying to attract eyeballs. We look at the grant of rights deal potentially on the table in the ACC. These guys at a younger stage of their career able to leverage their individual brand, I think it's only good for the student athlete.
Yeah, ultimately, you'll be able to watch them more frequently, so that exposure will help. But something that you mentioned too, Greg, is that Mater Dei is always working on this level, right? Everybody's just trying to catch up. You talked about the season tickets, the tailgates, all of that, but where's the trickle-down effect in this? How could this potentially affect the future of high school sports with what we've seen from Mater Dei here?
Yeah, I mean, I'm obviously thinking, just keeping it California-wise, St. John Bosco is probably saying, hey, what about us? They've been actually the dominant high school program football-wise since 2013. So Mater Dei kind of 2016, 2017. Obviously, Mater Dei has a longer track record going back to the 80s and 90s. But, the whole Trinity League as a whole has always kind of operated a little bit differently than their schools, high schools in California. You got your Santa Margaritas, your Servites, your J. Sarah. So obviously, a lot of private schools are probably going to try to seek a similar deal. And then you might have some elite, public schools, your Long Beach Polys, your Gardena Sarahs, schools like that, Mission Viejo High School as well. So Mater Dei is probably maybe just kind of the blueprint for it. But I think you're going to try to see other schools maybe kind of match that, or not the same kind of $1 million offer, but maybe at least a little bit of something, right?
To Greg's point, I think college football, NFL, you look at every league, it's a copycat league. And we saw what happened, the potential Hard Knocks deal that was going to happen with North Carolina. So what happens to these production companies that say, hold on, I can't get my hands on the NFL, I can't get my hands on college football. What's the next best thing? Maybe a Mater Dei, maybe a St. John Bosco, IMG Academy that I mentioned earlier. You talk about all of these guys with pro potential that you can follow that storyline from a really young age at 17, 18 years old. I think that's what we'll see modern day getting it started there in California. But I think we'll see this kind of branch out all over high school football.
Yeah, and according to the initial report, Playfly Sports has already heard from other high schools across the country ever since they saw this. So this is probably the beginning of just a crazy road for high school sports and more opportunities to see some of these athletes on display before you see them in college. We appreciate you joining us here on the Ultimate College Football Show. Go ahead and hit that like button. Make sure you are subscribed. And if you have any ultimate burning questions, our favorite part of the show, we'll answer them towards the end. So go ahead and drop them in the YouTube chat. You can find us on Twitter, X, I guess I'm supposed to call it now, Instagram, whatever you want. We love to answer your questions. Also, we are on the road to 1 billion views. That is billion with a B. We are at a little over 980 million. So first off, thank you so much for being a part of that. If you're hearing the sound of my voice, you are a part of getting us to that 1 billion. And of course, continue to tell your friends. We are not saying goodbye to Greg Biggins, don't worry. We actually have him on here to talk about our ultimate bracket for today, which will be going through the number 1 prospects over the last 8 years, bracket style. We have a whole seeding process, which I will explain to you when I show you that bracket. But this has to do with the prospect coming out of high school, not necessarily what they've done since. Some have had prolific NFL careers, and some not so much. So this is just the prospect coming out of high school. Let's go ahead and show you that bracket. The way that the seeding works here is we have put 2 things into consideration. It's based on their rating coming out of high school, but then also positional value. So we have some prospects that were 101s. Those are going to be the top 3. And then some that were 100s, which is still pretty good. But we put those seeds based on positional value. So let's start with our first round matchup. In the top left corner, we have Trevor Lawrence and Antonio Alfano. Let's start with Cooper Petagna here. Make the case. Who wins this one?
Well, it's a pretty daunting task for Antonio Alfano. If you think about him and all the way back to his high school career coming out of New Jersey, this is a guy that 3 different high schools, 4 years. You think about the college experience, started at Alabama, went to Colorado, then ended up bouncing around couple different junior colleges, and then ultimately ended up in the CFL for a cup of coffee. Now he goes up against Trevor Lawrence, and you talk about a guy with just an absolute pristine resume in high school, Gatorade Player of the Year, 52-2 career record out of Cartersville High School in Georgia. That included a 41-game win streak, also included 2 state title wins. He also broke Deshaun Watson's state record in both passing yards and touchdowns. So tough for anybody to go up against Trevor Lawrence, but especially Antonio Alfano. I'm riding with Trevor Lawrence here, Biggie.
I mean, no disrespect to Mr. Alfano, but this is probably the one no-brainer in our bracket, right? I think this is kind of your classic 1 versus 16 seed if we're talking basketball. And again, for me, Trevor Lawrence, you have to be really nitpicky to find a discernible weakness in his game. I mean, the guy was, from a frame standpoint, from an arms talent standpoint, from an athleticism standpoint, from a compete level, the way he make up off the field, the way he competes, the way he presents himself, leadership, toughness. I mean, every box this guy checked for me. And again, special talent, special leader, tough. For me, no brainer. I'm going with Trevor Lawrence in this one as well.
All right, so the number 1 overall seed moves on to the final 4. We move down in the bracket to a Quinn Ewers versus Arch Manning matchup in the 5-4 game. Biggins, what do you think here?
This was tough. I'll be honest. If I'm going right now, I'm not trying to hedge my bet, but right now I would go Arch. But if we're going from where we had him in high school, I went with Quinn, and a lot of that was because I used to get to see a lot of Arch. You know, I trust my eyes, and I thought obviously that the film was definitely pop, special talent, athlete. But there were some games and some questions, even junior, senior year against some of the better competition where, he didn't shine. Not all his fault, right? He wasn't, playing with modern day level talent to kind of go back to that. Quinn Ewers, for me, I remember watching him as a junior before the reclass at a Steve Clarkson quarterback camp, and I had never seen an arm like that. I even called Gabe Brooks and literally said, Gabe, my nuts, like this guy has the most unique arm I've ever seen. Talk about easy velocity. The guy just came off his hand differently, whether it was rolling right, left, flick of the wrist, and the guy is just throwing darts all over the field. So I think I'm a big fan of I think senior development is huge for a quarterback, and Quinn didn't get that. And, obviously I'm still going to go with Quinn as my guy, but kind of hedge the bet a little bit. I wish we had that senior development of Quinn. He did the reclassification, but just I always remember where I was when I saw Quinn Ewers at the Clarkson retreat with those college quarterbacks saying, who the heck is this guy? We've never seen an arm in high school like him. And I think I was kind of just swayed, and that's why I'm going with Quinn.
I'm going to go with Arch Manning because, well, it's March, and we'll go with Arch Madness. But, Greg, to your point, not seeing Quinn Ewers live and seeing Arch Manning live, that's kind of where the confidence, conviction comes from with the evaluation process. And you think about Arch Manning, a guy that's obviously following in the footsteps of his uncles, his grandfather, some of the best to ever play the game, 34-9 at Isidore Newman there in New Orleans. You think about everything that he did statistically, almost 9,000 yards through the air, 115 touchdowns, only 20 interceptions. He played clean. But I think the other part about this is this was a kid from a really young age because of his last name, was always under the microscope. I love the way that he delivered. I saw him in a spring game. I like the way that he was wired. Obviously, we have seen that now at the collegiate level. Even though it's been a small sample size, we'll see a little bit more of that this year. What does that poise look like when you're in adverse situations? But I've always liked Arch Manning. This is a guy that I feel really even coming out of high school that his best football was ahead of him. I think that is going to be true with what we've seen so far already, and a guy that can continue to get better. Played lower level of football compared to Quinn Ewers, two-way ball there in New Orleans, but a guy with every rep, every year that passes by is only going to continue to improve.
This is where Judge Proud has to step in because you both have different arguments, but we got to fill out this bracket. And the fact that both of you mentioned the reclassification, I'm just going to lean towards Arch Manning here on this one. Moving on to the Final Four. But let's go to our next matchup, and this is a tough one. It's not going to be QB versus QB. We have Jeremiah Smith, the wide receiver, versus Bryce Underwood, the quarterback. And if you agree with my decision, hit that like button. If you disagree with my decision, hit that like button because we're all friends here. But this might be another one that I think there's some disagreements here. Coop, who you got, Jeremiah Smith or Bryce Underwood?
This is really kind of like the first big upset for me. I got Bryce Underwood in Michigan, and it's a Michigan-Ohio State battle. I swear that was pure coincidence that these two lined up against each other. But you look at Bryce Underwood's resume and some of the other guys that we've talked about. We've talked about Arch Manning, obviously highly regarded, Quinn Ewers, Trevor Lawrence. You go down the list. We'll talk about Bryce Young here in a second. But you look at Bryce Underwood, and the more you read into it, you say, wow, this guy was a 4-year starter, 50-4 record at Belleville High School, 2 state championships, 38-game win streak that he had there as well that spanned from his freshman year to his junior season. You think about everything that this guy has done, almost 13,000 all-purpose yards, 179 touchdowns. Really, really dynamic kid, got better and better and better. And you talk about elevating the talent around him, and we all know that Jeremiah Smith is a special talent, but in terms of the high school prospect, the body of work that Bryce Underwood put together in Michigan, in that state, is pretty unrivaled, quite honestly, outside of a couple of guys that we're going to talk about that rank number 1 here as well. So I'm going to go Bryce Underwood. It was not an easy decision, especially when you're talking about a guy like Jeremiah Smith.
I'm going to go Jeremiah Smith. And again, I just never got a chance to see Underwood live and use my eyes and what I always going to go back to. And again, I think sometimes when you say I like this guy more than this guy, people think, oh, you don't like that guy. No, I love Underwood. I think he's a special talent. He's got a body like Vince Young and throws it better at the same stage. And I was a huge Vincent Young fan. For me, Jeremiah Smith, though, I'll never forget where I was going to West College, watching him at an OT7. And I'm old, Coop. I saw Andre Johnson back in my student sports days at a Nike football camp, and Jeremiah Smith is the closest thing to me since watching Andre Johnson with my mouth wide open saying these boys in South Florida are different. From a Southern California guy, the South Florida guys are different. It doesn't pay me to say it. I'm open to it. I think Jeremiah Smith, generational talent. I think he's special, unique. Again, going back to what I said about Trevor Lawrence, where's the weakness in Jeremiah Smith's game? I got to get the positional value. I'm all about quarterback going 1 because of the positional value. But Jeremiah Smith, he's long and he's fast. He's strong and he's tough. He's competitive. He's got big hands, strong hands, body control, 50-50 balls, pure route runner for a young receiver. Again, what does this guy do wrong? You can't find it, whether it be, again, going back when Andre Johnson. I've seen Jeremiah just bully grown men, right? This is a grown man playing against other grown men, making them look like me, Coop. So Jeremiah Smith is my guy. Love Underwood. Love my guy Sam Webb. I'm going to go with Jeremiah Smith in this one.
I didn't even think about the Ohio State-Michigan matchup. That makes this one extra juicy, and the fact that you disagree means that I have to come up with the guy that will be moving on to the Final Four. And this is a tough one because we want to consider the positional value, but also when you use a term like generational talent, something we've never seen before, it's really hard to argue with that. But we had to use positional value when we did seeding here. I don't have to use it in my rule, so I'm going to go ahead and put Jeremiah Smith moving on to the Final Four to face, we'll see. How about Bryce Underwood versus Travis Hunter? That is an incredibly challenging decision to make between these two very different quarterbacks. So we got Bryce Young, Travis Hunter. Let's start with Coop here. Make your case.
I'm going to go with Bryce Young, and the reason why was I was the director of player personnel back there 2018, 2019 at University of Washington. Bryce Young was going to USC. I called in a favor of the department that I oversaw and said, hey, can we get a cut up of this guy every single game? And the first thing that I would do every Saturday morning was watch Bryce Young's tape, even though at the time he was committed to USC, then later to Alabama. I loved watching this guy play. There was something poetic about the way Bryce Young played the game. You're talking about a guy at 5'10", really control the game on a string. It was unbelievable, and you're talking about him playing against the best level of competition there in the Trinity League in California. I know there are going to be a lot of people in the state of Texas, in the state of Georgia that will probably refute that. I will say, watching Bryce Young, watching Modern Day, watching St. John Bosco, that was the best level of competition. And yes, he had a lot of weapons, including guys like Brew McCoy, but this dude, every single game, made it go. And you talk about the resume, what he was able to do his senior year, especially the cherry on top, completed over 72% of his passing attempts. Just a magician. He's been compared to Steph Curry. It really doesn't make sense when you talk about having a cross-sport player comparison, but if you watch the way that these two, at their size, their ability, the wizardry of how they control the game, Bryce Young was pretty special. One of the best players that I've ever scouted in my day.
Yeah, I'm going to go with Bryce Young too. I'm going to say, for me, he is the best player I've scouted, doing this almost 30 years. And I'm talking just mostly California right now, right? And, talk about the size. And I get the dads calling me saying, hey, my son's 5'11" too. What about, could he be the next Bryce Young? And the answer was no. You don't understand how good Bryce Young was. And if you're that size, you need to be exceptional in every other area, and Bryce was. From an arm talent standpoint, he had sneaky arm strength. He had big hands, 10-plus hands, but it was the athleticism, the feel, the ability to just chaos all over the place. And he has a sneaky way of just kind of escaping pressure and making a radical throw, rolling right, left. Decision-making was always on point. Toughness. You saw him playing against Georgia and Tennessee and just getting the crap kicked out of him and getting up with a smile. And I've never seen that before. But Bryce Young, for me, I do want to say something about Travis Hunter. I was disappointed to see these two guys matched up because I would have had Travis third overall on this list. Love Travis. And a guy could go on and on and on about not just the player, the two-way, two-sport guy, but just talk about a guy who just is wired the right way. And I've seen him in so many different settings, 7-on, Under Armour, Showcase, Poly Bowl, doesn't matter what it was, always competed every single rep. Never saw him take a rep off. And then I would see him with no cameras on him, literally sign every autograph and take every photo with kids that lined up for hours to watch him. And so that always stuck with me with Travis Hunter. I'll always be a huge fan. Again, my number 3 guy, unfortunately for me, Bryce Young, a little bit higher for me. I got to go with Bryce, but I do love Travis Hunter.
Yeah, I think for Greg and I, too, Greg being on the West Coast and me being at UW at the time, it's a little bit more intimate of a knowledge of a guy that we got to scout a little bit more closely. And Travis Hunter was right when I got to 24/7, and a guy that never ran. I mean, we didn't have any explosive speed numbers on him, so you were kind of sitting there saying, this guy's the number 1 player in the country. He had a lower extremity injury as well. But the way that he would dominate at every exposure point that you saw him said a lot about Travis Hunter and what type of competitor he was. It was one of those where it was like, just don't overthink it, right? This kid has made the decision for us every time that we've seen him. And for us, he's made us look pretty good.
Oh, this is a tough one. This is what we talk about in the basketball tournament with just a tough first-round matchup with Travis Hunter having to go up against Bryce Young, one of the best young prospects on this list, and the number 2 overall seed that rounds out our Final Four. Before we move on, we've been asking you to vote on Twitter, so I want to on YouTube here, so I want to give you some of the results. Between Trevor Lawrence and Antonio Alfano, the crowd has picked Trevor Lawrence, so they agree with you there. Between Quinn Ewers and Arch Manning, it was 50-50, so that was definitely a hard decision for me, but I went ahead and picked Arch Manning there. And then between Bryce Underwood and Jeremiah Smith, Bryce Underwood got the nod, barely 57% to 42%. But alas, I picked Jeremiah Smith, so come at me. And then finally, Bryce Young versus Travis Hunter. 60% of the votes went to Bryce Young. So let's go ahead and move on to our final four. We have Trevor Lawrence going up against Arch Manning. Coop, who wins this?
I got Trevor Lawrence really kind of running away with this. And I don't want to go back to Greg's point just about Arch and Arch playing two-way football. And you talk about elevating the guys around you. And I think Arch Manning did that. But when you talk about a guy in Trevor Lawrence who became a starter his freshman year at Cartersville playing a high level of comp, and then you look at the record, 52-2. I mean, this guy had a 41-game win streak. I mentioned that earlier. But talk about the level of competitor his freshman year at Clemson, carrying that over as well. So I like this one. Out and away here with Trevor Lawrence over Arch Manning.
I went with Trevor Lawrence as well. Again, don't want to repeat myself from what I said earlier. Just coming out of high school, what did Trevor Lawrence do wrong, right? What was the weakness in his game? And I couldn't find one. I actually like Arch better now than I did coming out of high school. To me, it showed Arch. A lot of guys would have transferred if they were Arch by now, right? I love the fact that he wanted to stay and play under Sark. And even if it take two, day and age now, right now, it's different with the portal the way it is, where kids, if you're not starting by your true freshman year, I'm out of here. And Arch, for me, it showed me a lot by staying there. I think he's going to have a great junior year. He's going to be a first-round pick, maybe first overall pick. But, again, Trevor Lawrence, one of the most unique high school players I've ever seen. And I got to go with Trevor.
All right, Trevor Lawrence. Moving on to the national championship. Who will he face between Jeremiah Smith and Bryce Young? Greg Biggins, would you like to kick us off there?
I'm going to go with Bryce. Again, I talked about Jeremiah being the Andre Johnson of our generation. But, again, I'm going to go positional value. I know I contradicted myself a little bit because I went with Jeremiah a little earlier over Bryce Underwood. But I got to go with Bryce Young. Special talent, special kid. Again, just wired the right way. And one of those guys, Coop mentioned modern day and playing on that big stage. For me, watching Bryce the way, I did, I was just as impressed with him when he played at LA Cathedral High School, which is a smaller school, where I jokingly said he would get the snap and have 18 guys in his face. And he'd have to make guys miss and make all these crazy football plays that most normal kids could not do. So people say, modern day had a ton of talent. I saw him without that talent, and he was the guy for me. He was the number one quarterback for me before he got to modern day and he committed to USC before his junior season. So Bryce Young, love them both, but Bryce Young for me, best quarterback I've seen.
I agree with Biggie here. The other thing on Bryce Young, like one of the most complete, casual, graceful playmakers from the pocket that I've ever seen. And I think, when the Steph Curry thing comes up, it sounds a little bit silly, but when you watch both of them play, they look almost nonchalant in their ability to kind of control and dominate a game. And that's really what you see Bryce Young, his ability to pocket navigate, move his eyes, create passing lanes down the field as well. His ability to do that day in and day out, week to week, against playing some of the best competition in California is why I've been riding with Bryce Young, especially kind of in that first-round matchup. But I love Bryce Young. Like I said, it's a little bit more of a intimate knowledge of scouting this guy is one of the most favorite things I got to do.
I love it. And I especially appreciate that you guys are agreeing here so I don't have to make a tough decision. So make it easy for me here with the national championship, why don't you? We have Trevor Lawrence versus Bryce Young to determine who is the number one prospect over the last 8 years. Biggins, I'll go to you first on this. Who wins it all?
It was tough, Emily and Coop. It was painful, but I had to eliminate my SoCal bias. And I went with Trevor Lawrence. Again, I think, Coop said it very, may have been off camera, but they're very similar in a lot of ways, except one guy is 6'4" and one guy is 5'11". And talk about playmaking, at the high school level coming out. And, even though I was all about Bryce being the number one quarterback, number one player overall in our class, in the back of my head, I still kind of wondered, man, but he's 5'11". And it wasn't a stocky, Kyler Murray 5'11". It was a, 170-pound 5'11". And so I always wondered, man, can this guy physically hold up? He's going to get pounded in the SEC, NFL. Whereas Trevor Lawrence, again, I love the same things I liked about Bryce Young with Trevor Lawrence. Maybe not the innate feel that Bryce had for the position in terms of just the pocket, when to escape, when to stay in there, when to climb it, throwing with anticipation. Bryce, best I've ever seen with that. But Trevor does everything well the way Bryce does. But talk about a 6'4", 6'5" guy who can absolutely run. So if it's big guy, small guy, both elite. I went with the Trevor Lawrence, and tough call, but I Trevor Lawrence was my guy.
Greg, I'm going to go with the SoCal bias. I'm going to go with Bryce Young. Everything you just said, you just made the argument for me. The biggest thing about it is that's what makes it kind of even more insane and even more special watching Bryce Young do the things that he has done throughout his high school career, throughout his collegiate career, and now hopefully getting back on track with David Canales in Carolina. But you think about this guy, all the obstacles, at least from a size standpoint, for him to even be the number one ranked quarterback. And I know that sounds crazy, especially because a lot of the people here, we work at the company that made those decisions. We know the philosophy. We know the philosophy, scouting philosophy of all NFL evaluators. That's what they want. They want a Trevor Lawrence. They want a 6'4", 6'5" guy. They want a DJ Uiagalelei who's got the big hands and the big frame at 230 pounds that can throw the ball 65 yards in the field. What about a guy like Bryce Young that does everything well and 5'10"? You said it. It's not like this stocky frame like Kyler Murray, who's also a first-round draft pick in the MLB. It's not who he is. This is a guy that's slender, 175, 180 pounds. For everything else to have to be right, to overcompensate at the level that he did is pretty remarkable, and part of the reason why I think the argument is even stronger for a guy like Bryce Young at the end of the day.
I love it. I love what you – again, Bryce, I know the family well. Mom and dad, quarterback dads, I've always said this for a lot of years, that the nuttiest species on the planet is the quarterback dad. And Craig Young, his dad, is not a part of that group. Like, Bryce is the way he is because of the parents and the way he was raised. And they were the best quarterback parents, mom and the dad were. So I love that you went on that limb. And, Bryce is unique, man. Bryce is special. I love that he kind of rallied a little bit, right, at the NFL level last year. And I'm a believer in how he does things. And I can't argue with you. I think for me, it was just watching Trevor Lawrence and just seeing the sheer size, right? A guy was just an Adonis. Looked like I can't even think of a good player comp for him coming out of high school. And again, I'm a big fan of makeup. And I saw Trevor Lawrence at the opening when he struggled. I think briefly there was some talk about Justin Fields bumping over Trevor Lawrence because of the opening performance. I just watched Trevor looking really unflappable and seeing guys and picking up his teammates and receivers dropping balls. And he never yelled and he never was flustered. And he was just that guy. And Bryce off the field, locker room, leadership. You saw it last year when he was benched, right? What did Bryce Young do the game after they won? He's there giving everybody a handshake. Again, that's just how Bryce is wired. The toughness of just getting the snot kicked out of him and getting up and smiling. The guy has never been hurt. And we talked about Steph Curry. I love the Steph Curry comment, Coop, because, he didn't play basketball in high school, but Bryce was an elite basketball player prior. And if you see him play football, he's kind of like no-look throws. He's kind of made those look, you see a lot of it with my guy Matt Stafford being a Rams guy, but Bryce did that back in high school, and it was because of the basketball background, being a point guard. I mentioned the hand size. Again, Bryce had bigger hands than DJU coming out of high school. People didn't really know about that too. So, I love the fact that we went with number one, Bryce. I think now, credit also, one of our former guys, Martin Simmons, for being ready to go on the table and say, Bryce Young was small, let's stamp him anyway. I don't know if we'd be able to do that now just because of the projection. But still, Trevor Lawrence, for me, why I went with him, and it was close. I just felt does a lot of the same things that Bryce did, and so he was more of the no-brainer, right? You talk about Bryce, everything had to break correctly for him. Trevor, you just thought, no matter where he went, no matter what system, he was going to do well. So Trevor Lawrence, but I love that you went with Bryce as well.
Oh, boy. It's going to make my decision challenging. I've heard both of your closing arguments. And I do appreciate that this is such a back and forth conversation when it comes to there's like a half a foot difference between these two prospects. So it's really what you prefer. But there's a saying, guys, and it goes, it's not about the size of the dog in the fight. It's about the size of the fight and the dog. I'm picking Bryce Young to be the number one prospect in our ultimate bracket. Greg Biggins, thank you so much for being here and playing along, Coop. I appreciate your arguments, and we did it together as a family. We filled out this bracket, and now we'll let the internet do what the internet does and tell us that we were wrong. You can check out more of Greg's great work on 247sports.com. It's also the place to get all of your recruiting news and rankings, and that's where you will see the current number one player in the 2026 class and beyond. Sticking with the theme here, it is time for our recruiting spotlight. Quarterback Jared Curtis has officially set a commitment date. The top 15 prospect posted an Instagram story last night teasing news soon with a countdown that ended at 1 a.m. Eastern early this morning. I hope you didn't stay up because the actual news came closer to 1 o'clock. But either way, here's Tom Loy with that news.
elite quarterback Jared Curtis has set his commitment date for May 5th. This is the number 13 overall player in the class of 2026, the number 4 overall quarterback this cycle, and the top prospect in Tennessee. His finalists are Oregon and Georgia. It is Mike Bobo and Kirby Smart at Georgia versus Will Stein and Dan Lanning at Oregon. Like I said, the commitment is going to take place on May 5th, so where is he headed at this point? My best guess is Oregon. I think that is the place he has always wanted to be. I know he committed to Georgia early on, and he had a ton of love for the Bulldogs, and they are very much in play right now. But as I see it, just a few weeks ahead of his decision, I like the Ducks. I like Dan Lanning. I think Oregon gets done with this elite signal caller.
All right, so Tom thinks that Oregon is the front runner in this race, but I'm just going to ask you, which school between Oregon and Georgia do you think fits him best?
He can't go wrong. I mean, he's got the pick of the litter, and then with the Bulldogs and obviously Dan Lanning and Oregon, two programs that have a very similar identity. Obviously, we understand the relationship that Lanning has going all the way back to his days working at Georgia under Kirby Smart. But I like Georgia. They need a really kind of impact-ready player. And you think about Jared Curtis, a little bit old for his age, a guy that converted positions. He's tough. He's around 225 pounds, and I think a guy that can go in that quarterback room and compete. And we'll see whether or not Gunnar Stockton is going to be the long-term answer. What does it look like with Ryan Puglisi? Are they going to continue to bring guys in? Who's going to be the answer there? I think it's a little bit murkier of a situation at Georgia, but I think the water is warm for him to go in there and contribute. Oregon, they're going to continue to do what they do in and year out. They bring back Dante Moore, a guy that they missed on in the high school ranks. They bring him back via the transfer portal. He'll replace Dylan Gabriel. You got young guys like Akili Smith, Jaron Kiwa, Sagapula-Tele is out of there as well. But he can't go wrong. Will Stein, the job that he's done as offensive coordinator in Eugene, he's been phenomenal, and he's made this a really attractive place. And I think the other thing that you have to think about with Oregon, the success that Bo Nix had there as well, a guy that played in the SEC, a guy that's from the southeastern part of the United States. I think that bodes well for Oregon and future signal callers, guys like Jared Curtis that say, hey, you can come outside of the SEC footprint and have a lot of success, and we can develop you, put you in a situation where you're going to be in a prominent, ideal situation for the NFL as well. So he can't go wrong between the two, but I think Georgia needs him, and I think Georgia, honestly, is the better fit.
So it'll be a rivalry to figure out where Jared Curtis is headed between Georgia and Oregon. But for this week's Rivalry Rumble, we focus on the Iron Bowl. We have two very special guests to discuss it and one very invested co-host. Enjoy.
The Iron Bowl, one of college football's most intense rivalries. Represents a clash not just of football teams, but of the cultural pride within the state of Alabama. Who walked the state with their head held high the next 365 days? This isn't about rankings or records. When you take the field, remember what this rivalry means. This is the Iron Bowl. This is war.
Does it get any bigger than the Iron Bowl? We have some pretty important people here that can answer that question. Two-time national champion out of Alabama, Damien Harris, and the second overall pick in 2005 out of Auburn, Ronnie Brown. Before we get to our guests, though, we do need to acknowledge our host here in studio, Smoke Dixon, of course, played some football for Alabama and actually went head-to-head.
Be sci-fi.
Yes, sir. Sci-fi. What's going on, baby?
Oh, goodness. This is going to be a fun conversation. We got two Alabama people here, but then, of course, you went up against Ronnie Brown back in the day. There's already been some conversation when we got here today, the discrepancies between what the correct record is. So, Ronnie, I'll let you have the first word here. What do you remember about going up against this guy to my left?
You know what? It was crazy because I didn't know, like, the impact of that game. I'm a Georgia guy. So I grew up in Georgia. And so first time playing in that game, you realize the magnitude of it. You got, kids and people flipping you off coming in the stadium. And so it already threw me off. I'm looking at it like, wait a minute, what's going on? And so playing in that game, it's a different atmosphere. And the one thing I do think that we all agree on is inside the NFL locker rooms, that conversation is this has to be the best rivalry. One, because there's no professional sports in Alabama. But two, it's just the magnitude of that game, what it brings out of people, not even the players. You see the worst of some people during that time. And so I enjoyed it, and that became one of the motivating factors for me, right? Like those were the games that I really enjoyed the most. Like playing in those games, you got the big time game, everybody's watching, it's the rivalry, everybody emotions are up. So I enjoyed it. That was a time to shine. And that was one of the games that we had in our pocket that we called, this is one of those league games, right? Like if you can play well in these games, this can get you to the next level.
Absolutely. Just like B, I'm from Silver Spring, Maryland. So that whole Alabama-Auburn thing, didn't make sense to me until you get into that first game. You're like, whoa. Bottles are getting thrown at you after the game. Little kids, like you said, are flicking you off. Everybody hates you. But the crazy thing is, I had a cousin that was at Auburn, and we'll call it Cal College for right now because that's the last time I'm going to respect that
the
school.
pastors.
The pastors. So we're going to say Cal College. So you don't really understand the impact until you get into the game, and you're like, it's here. And my first year in 1999 was the first time Bama had played Cal College down there. So we go in there and we do what we usually do, bust them up, run through them, end the game, and we're singing our song, and we end up in the place that Cal College rarely gets, Atlanta, for the SEC championship.
Let's bring in the young guy to this conversation, Damien Harris. You didn't get to compete with or against either of these guys, but what do you remember about that rivalry during your time at Alabama?
Wow, I just remember a state being divided. I mean, like Ronnie said, there is no pro team. And when you live in the state of Alabama, you either cheer for Alabama football or Auburn football. And there's a lot of households where one side is orange and blue and the other side is crimson and white. So I just remember an entire state that was just, it was like it was divided by a line, and you had to choose your side. There was no half-stepping. There was no straddling the fence. You were either an Auburn guy or you were a Bama guy. And I think that that's what makes the rivalry so great. I mean, all eyes are on those two programs, and there's so many people that pour so much into each university. Again, like Ronnie said earlier, just the emotions are at an all-time high. I mean, you've got kids yelling F you to the other side. I remember walking into Jordan-Hare Stadium seeing elephants hanging on ropes and stuff. I was like, man, what is going on here? Like, this is crazy. But, kind of like somebody else on this show that played against Auburn a couple of times, we just roughed them up every chance we got. I mean, we knew that Auburn was going to be looking at us like a team where they could make a name for themselves or make a statement, uplifting their season. But we rarely let it happen. And the one time that we did let it happen, unfortunately for us, we made up for it on the back end. We won a national championship that year. I'm pretty sure Auburn lost to UCF that year, and that was when they were claiming to be national champions. But at the end of the day, we knew what it was. We knew that we were the best team. Auburn, they fell short, but it was a great rivalry. It was a great atmosphere to be around, and it was one of those games where if you love football, if you love competing, if you love stepping inside those white lines and proving that you were the best and you could compete against the best, man, that was the game to watch during rivalry week.
So in 2002, we took that L to B, Cadillac, Jason Campbell, and that was a loaded team. That was my last home game at Bryant-Denny. And it hurt us a little bit more because y'all stole Cadillac from us. We had Cadillac all sealed, delivered to come.
You don't want to talk about stealing recruits. That ain't what we want to talk about on here. That's the definitely thing that we don't want to talk about.
Are we talking about stealing recruits or just out recruiting? Which one? Because there's a difference.
I don't know. It sounds like we were on the winning end of this one, so you might want to ask your sci-fi brother right there. Listen. You guys figured a way in the 11th hour to go up there, take them away from us. How you guys did that, we don't know. But we just know that the LAC showed up in the LAC down there at Jordan-Hare, and he started running the ball at a high level. But in 2002, both you guys were out. So we went into that game thinking like, you know what? We're about to blow these guys out. And it always happens when you take that game not expecting Auburn to come out there and fight. You guys came out there and kicked our faces in just the rivalry part of it. All those guys from the state of Alabama, we had the better team in that year, but you guys had the better players that played with that much this attitude. Jason was connecting all the passes. Trey was out there running through us. And we expected Lack and B to be out here. Who's this dude running all over us? And we went home. Yeah, that's how it happened. But, when you look at it, I mean, I don't think Auburn, we're not the sexy team in Alabama. Right? You look at the history of what Tuscaloosa has been, we've never been, that we're just that hard-nosed team. That's kind of how we're built. We're not usually the most talented. We're rarely favored to win that game. And so I think I like the mindset of that. It's against all odds. You look at a situation in 02, where Cadillac gets hurt, then I get hurt in the Georgia game and leading into the Alabama game. And then we got a guy, Trey Smith, who, was Mr. Florida, Mr. Football in Florida. So, was very talented guy. He comes in, he has that mindset. And so it was just next man up. And I think it's a mindset that's taken, and we always feel like we can win that game, And so, unfortunately, historically, a lot of times we don't necessarily get the top recruits. They are surprised when we do. You can hear Smokey talking about, oh, man, we should have gotten this guy. We don't do moral victories at Auburn, so it is what it is. And, just go out, you put your jersey on, you go play, you get your hard hat, you get your work pill, and let's get it done.
I love these competitors, too. You guys are bringing up the loss that you experienced against the other team, because that's the one that is what really sticks with you. Ronnie, I'm curious from your perspective on the Auburn side of things, what's the lead up to this game like? How is it different than the other games on your schedule that season?
Yeah, well, I think that's a week where there's certain games on the schedule and the calendar. Alabama's obviously one of those games. Georgia was that for me, being a kid from Georgia, and a lot of guys from my hometown, being Georgia fans. But that's a game that week, say, man, coaches shouldn't have to coach you this week, right? Like the motivation, if you need motivation, you need speeches and all of that, you're in the wrong sport, because we know what we're getting. It's going to be a knockdown, drag-out fight for 4 quarters. Whoever wins the game is going to be physically busted up or beat up the next week. And so just enjoying that part of it and saying, okay, listen, this is what true competition is about, right? The rivalry, the build-up to it, the fan involvement, the trash talking, sometimes the extracurricular with the fan base. It's just all things that you want about college football, all in one, impacted in a week. And then going into the game, obviously the bragging rights, that's a year-long thing. That carries over to other seasons, basketball season, all of those things. And so you just know what that game means to not only you as a player, to the coaching staff, but also to the state. And it goes beyond that. And usually outside the state of Alabama, people recognize, the significance of that game, the Iron Bowl, and what it means to college football.
Yeah, the Iron Bowl meant a ton to us because we're coming at the end of the season, and we always had the LSU, Mississippi State, Auburn game. Just 3 headbangers that you knew was going to be a physical matchup, and you had to go out there in order to go through the SEC and end up in Atlanta. You had to go through all those 3 schools. And even if Auburn wasn't the top school at that point, you knew that you couldn't go 365 days to hear your coaches and everybody within your community say, you know what, you guys lost that game. You're like, but we won the SEC championship. Like, nah. You lost the state championship. So, D. Harris, leading up to that game, what was that week like for you guys, having Nick Saban there and going through that?
Y'all welcome, too. You're welcome, D. I was a part of that. That's who drafted me. So,
man, listen.
Miami. So, you're welcome.
First of all, thank you. I appreciate you letting him move on to greener pastures, as we like to say in the South. But a little bit different than you guys. I would say my experience was more so the coaches were really, really amped up that week. And it was a little bit opposite of what you guys are saying, because you guys are talking a lot about how that's the week where coaches shouldn't have to get players up. But with the Nick Saban mindset and the way that he ran the ship, he was so determined to make sure that we did not get lost in the parade of this being the Iron Bowl. We were not going to be lost in the external factors and things that did not affect the game playing a part of the game. So any talk about the Iron Bowl and the fact of, it's our biggest rival, all of that was out the window, because every single week from the start of the season, really 4th quarter, spring ball, A-Day, training camp, we were always preparing ourselves for the last game of the season, which is the national championship. Even though this was a humongous rivalry, obviously it's the Iron Bowl, it's one of the biggest. We're going to sit here and argue that it's the biggest, but we were always so focused on just getting to that last game and playing at a level that was high enough to win the big dance. No disrespect, I am going to take a shot here, but we knew Auburn wasn't going to be the best team that we played that year. So again, as players, as coaches, we were so focused on just being ourselves, not getting lost in the hoopla of Auburn's going to town or we got to go to Jordan-Hare. We know what the environment's going to be like. We don't worry about any of that because we knew as long as we showed up and we were at our best, we were the big brother. Auburn was always going to be the little brother. And it usually played out that way because, again, we just focused on execution, fundamentals, being our best. And usually we came out on the winning side of that.
B, we had a ton of battles, and you had the Georgia versus Auburn. That's another rival. Now, why is the Iron Bowl, Ronnie, the best rival in college football?
Well, I think it's like what we talked about earlier. You know, it's an in-state rivalry. There are no college, no pro sports in Alabama. It's a state, like Dame said, divided. You're either one side or the other. There's no straddling the fence on this. You hear about family members getting into it about this game. You know, the kids get involved. You're talking about getting flicked off by, you know, young kids. I think they're being raised to understand the magnitude of this rivalry and all the things that entail it. And it's just the bragging rights, right? Like, it's just, you know, the good Southeast. It's Southeastern football, the best conference in college football. And when you get those two teams historically, looking at the backdrop of it, it's so many things that kind of determines and a part of what college football represents. And it's the importance of college football, right? Like, the state pretty much shuts down. Everybody's watching that game. And, you know, that's the one thing. It's kind of like Friday night football on a collegiate level, right? Like, you get that from a state field. And it's, you know, you think about some of the schools and the states where the college Friday nights are the thing. Well, you have that with a whole state. And I think you look at the magnitude of that, the importance of that game, you know, I think the bragging rights and all the things that go into it, it just makes sense. And, you know, you get into, you know, NFL locker rooms and you start talking about that and you hear the other rivalries, the Michigans, the Ohio State. It's Southeastern football first, but then it's Auburn, Alabama.
I know we've been going head to head, but Damien, I have a feeling that you probably agree with this. Why is this the best rivalry in college football?
I agree with everything that Ronnie just said. And there's a couple instances where you look at how far people have taken this rivalry, i.e. the Alabama fan way back when that poisoned the tree in Auburn. Or, you know, you look at Dixieland Delight, the song that is so near and dear to Alabama fans' hearts. The first thing they say during one of the breaks is F Auburn. Like, this isn't even a story to get into right now, but me and some people, I think it was the SGA president at the time, Miss Terry Saban and Greg Byrne, the athletic director, we had to get together and make a pact of how to bring Dixieland back to the stadium just because they stopped playing it because too many people were sitting there screaming F Auburn. I mean, it's just there's so many different things. And again, when you see what it means to so many different people, and I think something else that should be noted when talking about what makes this rivalry so heated is Alabama. Ronnie made a good point. Alabama generally gets the sexy recruits. They get the big names. They get the 5 stars. Well, Auburn is a school that gets a lot of guys who Alabama doesn't have space for. A lot of those spots, a lot of those scholarships were already taken. So teams or kids from in-state, from the state of Alabama, they just end up going to Auburn. But then once they get there, they see big, bad Alabama, and they're like, I'm just as good as this guy. I should have played at Alabama. Nick Saban should have came calling me. He should have come offer me a scholarship. So guess what? Whenever we played him in Iron Bowl, I'm gonna show up, show out, and prove why they should have looked at me, why they should have recruited me. So I think there's just so many different avenues that you can look at, whether it's the fan perspectives or it's the players' perspectives. I mean, there have been coaches who have beaten Alabama at Auburn, and it has lifted their coaching careers. And there have been times where Nick Saban has lost to Auburn, and quite frankly, some people have called for his job just because it's such an important game. Now, obviously, that's nonsense, but that's just what the rivalry means, and that's what, you know, the expectations and all the different emotions that go into the rivalry, they just play such a big part, and that's why it's so important.
Allow the Knoxville native here to point out that Dixieland Delight is a song about Tennessee. I just feel like I need to throw that out.
Don't do this, Emily Brown.
I'm just saying.
Don't do this.
I'm just saying.
Listen,
I did hear
don't
that,
do
Emily.
this.
I did hear that because the funny thing, before I went to Auburn, I actually committed to Tennessee, so that was the wholesale.
Okay, I know.
It's our song.
The band is Alabama,
right?
but the song is about Tennessee.
Hey,
it's our song.
But Emily, they're used to stealing stuff, so I mean,
So even
you just called us low
you're
down.
even admitting
I
that
didn't say that.
Auburn was your second choice.
Stealing things.
Okay. I opened up a whole new can of worms here. I apologize. Let's continue with the conversation because clearly this is something that is still innate in all of us here at the set with our fandom. But Damien, how has your fandom and your this view of the rivalry maybe changed from when you were a player to now as an alum?
I think it's losing its steam a little bit, and not from a standpoint of how heated the rivalry is, but I think more of like a competition style. Now, I will say, whenever you see the Iron Bowl, you usually see there's been a couple years where, Jalen Milroe, Bryce Young, they had to make heroic efforts to win those games, but I just feel like the rivalry just isn't as intense anymore when I look at the play on the field. I don't see all the chirping. I don't see, not the dirty plays, but the plays where you block somebody through the echo of the whistle. I feel like, whether it's Alabama or whether it's Auburn, I think it might be Alabama just because, Ronnie, I don't know, maybe we've won the game so many times in the past 20-something years. Maybe it's just getting a little old for us, but I just don't see that. I just don't see.
We're gonna see now. Saban's gone.
Ronnie, listen, I'm just telling you, we won it a lot recently. Okay, maybe 20 was a stretch. Maybe I should say, say 10 to 15. 10
Ronnie,
to 15.
we bust y'all up when Saban wasn't there.
But at the end of the day, I just don't see that same fire just come out and punch somebody in the mouth, particularly from the Alabama side. So I want to see that back. I want to see, a lot of times when people talk about, even when I've been on CBS this past season, people are talking about, is Tennessee a bigger rival than Auburn? Is LSU a bigger rival than Auburn? And I think that's because the style of play looks a little bit different. Maybe the coaching seems different. Maybe just the intensity in the games feel different. But I want to bring that Iron Bowl back. I want it to be like, no, Auburn is our biggest rival. We don't care about nothing else. We don't care about nobody else other than winning national championships and beating Auburn. Like, I want to see that get back. So I don't know. I think that it's got room to grow back into what it once was. Y'all can tell me if y'all disagree.
Yeah, Ronnie, what do you think?
I mean, that's a good part of it, and I think the essence of the game has changed a little bit. We talk about, I know Coach Saban's topic is NIL, but also just the impact of social media. A lot of these young men are growing up high school teammates. They're talking, they're fans, they're friends of one another. So I think the essence of the game has changed, also with the rules, right? Like, you can't do what you did in the early 2000s. Like, we had a rule, like if you were going across the middle of the field, like, you had to catch the ball because you were going to get hit anyway. And so I think they've changed a lot of that, and so made the game a little safer, but also, the way that social media has impacted, NIL has impacted. You don't get guys to be a part of the rivalry for 3, 4, 5 years because they're now at different places. They're coming in. They may not understand the importance of that rivalry, the impact of that rivalry for college football. So I think there are a few factors that factor in. As of late, Coach Saban era, like, they did do a good job of probably harnessing the majority of those wins. But I think it's too cyclical. You look at the SEC, there are so many good teams. There's a reason that, Texas and Oklahoma want to come get in the SEC. And so now you look at it and say, okay, now guys are starting to go around. Florida had their run in the late 90s. Like, then you get to 2000s, like, we were doing our thing. And then you got Alabama goes on their run. Now you get Georgia to get a part of it. And so you look at the rivalry, the game's changed a little bit, but I'm with Dame. I'm like, the importance of that rivalry, to restore itself. And the question is, how do you do that? Like, in the essence and in the midst of all this happening, amongst college football. But it is good for the game. It is good for the conference. It is good for the TV ratings. It's good for every part of college football when this rivalry is what it is.
Yeah, back in the day, we had to figure it out. You had to win your state for one. Then you had to go and win the state of Tennessee. And then you go over and you say, you know what, we're going to win the state of Georgia. And that's when you knew that you were like the true champions of the SEC. And I think we're missing that because a lot of these young kids are still bouncing around trying to figure themselves out. Like, it would crush me if I had to transfer to Auburn. Like, I wouldn't do it. I would sit out and I was like, you know what? I would rather go all the way up north so far away that I don't have to hear that. Like, just to put those colors on, like orange and blue at the same time, yuck. But B.
Hey, what did my guy say? He said blood. What? Red is the color of blood, right? And you don't get blood on my uniform. Ain't that what we heard? I think we all heard that, right?
I went mute for a quick second when you were saying that. I just know that orange and blue
that's what
makes
one
me
of the
cute.
greatest, if not the greatest actor in the world said about that color, right? Like, I don't know. Maybe I'm.
Listen,
can you help me?
I'm just going to interject to say this. I'm with Ronnie right here, just saying that Denzel's the best actor on the planet. Like, I did not come in here thinking I was going to agree with an Auburn guy about anything today, but hats off to you, Ronnie.
Hey, man, we got two things now. You got to agree on the running back position, too, now.
Well, yeah, for sure.
Okay, so I'm just
all right. Friends. Let's split apart again.
For a quick second. Now, B, let's get back to it. Get your serious face on. Now, make your case on why your school is going to dominate this rival in the next 5 years.
Well, I think, like I said, the cyclicalness of, college football, like, Alabama had its run. You can only collect talent for so long before these young men start going to other places. And it's like, why would I be number 2 on a roster, or why would I have to go compete when I can go to these other schools and get an opportunity, and you're incentivized, financially as well. And so when you look at that and saying, okay, like, the only way to the NFL is to play the game of football. Well, the only way to play is to participate in the games, and you got to go somewhere where there's opportunity. And so you look across college football now, like, you're starting to see a lot of these teams getting away from spring football, spring games, because you're getting a lot of poachers. You're looking at guys that are looking at rosters and they're saying, okay, let me go see who we can pick off. And so I think that's just the essence of it. Obviously, a breath of fresh air. We need to solidify the foundation. We had some turnover in the coaching staff, as you guys did in the early 2000s, right? I think, you guys went through between 99 and 2005, a few coaches. Auburn's been in that the last few years. And so I think with stability comes, understanding and, I think normalizing that. And so if we can do that, now you get a consistent recruiting class, you get a consistent scheme and approach that makes things better. And then you produce a better product. And so I think that's where Auburn is the last few years, this last 2 years in particular, from a recruiting standpoint. I think we've won that battle. And so I think that transitions into hopefully play on the field.
All right, Damien, you get the last word here. Make the case for Alabama. Why do the Crimson Tide dominate this rivalry the next 5 years?
Emily Proud, I feel like you might not be too surprised by what I'm about to say, but the only thing that gives me confidence that Alabama is going to continue to dominate this rivalry is the fact that we've dominated it the past couple years and more on the recent side of history. I mean, I can't not be honest with you guys and say that I wasn't disappointed in what I saw from Kalen DeBoer, that whole entire Alabama team, the program as a whole. Like, I was disappointed. A lot of other fans were disappointed. A lot of former players were disappointed, former coaches, just because that was not the product that we were expecting to see step on the field for Alabama last year. Especially, I know that it's tough shoes to fill, trying to replace Nick Saban and the regime that he built, but coming off of that high, that euphoria that, almost hasn't been done in the history of college football. I mean, there have been a couple other coaches, programs, runs that have come close, but not quite what Nick Saban was able to do. Seeing what we saw last year, it was a little bit of a disappointment and a bad taste in people's mouths. So going into this season, I have a lot of questions. I mean, some for DeBoer, the quarterback situation. I don't know who's going to win that battle. Last year, Alabama couldn't really run the ball as dominantly as they have in years past. And I wonder what that's going to be like this year, losing Justice Hayes to Michigan. And then on the defensive side of the ball, I mean, they couldn't stop a nosebleed last year. I mean, it was hard to stop people in the run game, in the pass game. We saw what Diego Pavia was able to do to them last year. I mean, hell, he looked like Johnny Manziel out there. So if I'm just looking at this Alabama team, I'm not going out here saying, oh, I've got a ton of confidence. I think they're going to do this year. I think they're going to do that this year. So I know this ain't really a good argument, Proud, but history tends to repeat itself.
You making my argument, right?
I know. But listen, but Ronnie, one thing you got to, Ronnie, I was going to say, one thing you got to respect about me is the fact that I'm keeping it real. Like, I'm not just going to get up here and say, okay, well, listen, I played at Alabama. I'm a fan of Alabama. Oh, they had a bad year last year, but they're automatically going to bounce back because they wear that script A on their chest. No, they got to put the work in. They got to figure out what they're going to do at quarterback. They're going to figure out how they're going to get their quarterback to match the system, which we were very sure that Jalen Milroe was not right for that system last year. We got to find guys who can get open and make explosive plays outside of Ryan Williams, which we don't know who those guys are yet. And then on the defensive side of the ball, I mean, we did lose a couple guys. A guy like Malachi Moore, who's a two-time captain, guys in the middle. We've lost a lot of people. So it's hard for me to be super confident right now. But again, the best indicator of the future does so happen to be the past. And so that's what makes me think that we're going to continue to dominate, just because that's just what we know how to do now. We know how to beat Auburn.
Well said from both of you. Thank you so much. I just want to point out that Smoke came into this segment with every intention of being buttoned up and just asking a few questions. But if this does not prove how intense the Iron Bowl is, he talked more smack than the two of you. So thank you guys so much for being here, Damien and Ronnie. And if you want more coverage of your favorite teams, if you are a fan of one of the teams in the Iron Bowl, you can check out Bama 247 and AuburnUndercover.com. Appreciate the guys for that great conversation and for Smoke coming in. We recorded that last week, but we're so excited to run that because it's fun to have that discussion. And, I have Cooper sitting next to me here. I'm just going to go ahead and ask you the question that I asked the guys. Of course, there was a little bit of bias in that room, but they're not here anymore. So, is the Iron Bowl the best rivalry in college football?
I would have had a lot different answer if Damien Harris and Ronnie Brown were right
You'd
here.
Like, yes. Mm-hmm.
I was fortunate enough to work at Alabama. It was the first job I ever had in football. I was an intern, and I was fortunate enough to be a part of that rivalry in the Iron Bowl. And then I worked in Michigan, and when they played Ohio State, I'll tell you what, those two games feel different. And for a guy that grew up in the South, in the SEC, you have a ton of respect for the Iron Bowl. But that Michigan-Ohio State rivalry, especially with what we've seen over the last couple years, and you talk about the last two national championships coming out of both Ann Arbor and Columbus, I'm going to go with Michigan and Ohio State.
Okay. I like that you compare those rivalries because we had kind of a similar moment when we talked about that rivalry with the guys, is that Damien was using this as an argument almost that we lost to Auburn, but we won the national championship, so ultimately we won. But you don't hear Ohio State fans saying that about losing to Michigan. There's still that asterisk almost where they're like, yeah, we're national champions, but man, we lost to Michigan again. So it just tells you how much that rivalry means. But that's why we love these conversations. That's what we do in March. We also like to answer your ultimate burning questions. You sent in some great questions today. We have to bring in a special guest because we had so much fun last week with Brad Crawford answering these ultimate burning questions. So we're putting him on the hot seat once again. And let's go ahead and start with our first ultimate burning question. This comes from Mr. Like That on Instagram saying, who had the better supporting cast for Carson Beck, Miami or Georgia? Brad, what do you say?
I'm going to give the slightest of edges to Miami in this scenario because I think there's less question marks along the offensive front. We can kind of consider the offensive line a supporting cast, right? I know we think about running backs, wide receivers, tight ends even, but the offensive line is going to be much better at Miami, I think, this year than Georgia. And the offensive scheme, I've said it before on the show, under Shannon Dawson at Miami, I think that is more conducive to success for Carson Beck than it is for Beck where he was last year with Mike Bobo at Georgia. So I'm not saying Beck's numbers are going to be Cam Ward-like as a Heisman front runner, but I do think that the talent right now is better on offense at Miami than it is at UGA.
Brad, I love your point on Miami's offensive line, which I would give them the edge over the Bulldogs. But in terms of everything else, where Georgia lacked last year, I'm going to give Georgia the edge. And it makes me kind of think, why didn't you do what you did this offseason? Last year, you go out, you get a guy like Zachariah Branch, you get Noah Thomas as well. You got guys like Dylan Bell and guys like Colby Young and London Humphreys coming back. You think about 2 years ago, the type of players that they had, Ladd McConkey, Brock Bowers. I think they've done a really good job giving Gunnar Stockton the type of support that he needs at the skill, mid-skill positions. Think about Lawson Lucky, Oscar Delp, Jaden Riddell. They got some young guys coming in, Talon Taylor as well, C.J. Wiley. There is a lot of talent there in Athens. In Miami, you look at it, and it's, whoa, Elijah Arroyo's gone. You think about Isaiah Horton, he's gone. Jacoby George is gone. Samuel Brown is gone. They're missing a lot there. So I wonder, for Carson Beck, who struggled last year absent of the playmakers on the outside in Athens, what's it going to look like in Coral Gables this year? I'll give Georgia the better fit this year in 2025 for Carson Beck.
So, Coop, how could
also losing Restrepo is huge. I mean, he's a guy who was all ACC back-to-back years, so that's a big loss for Miami as well.
I'm going to ask Coop the tough question since Brad agreed that Miami was the smart move, I guess, going there in terms of the offensive line and the guys he has around him. So, Coop, how could this potentially maybe affect his NFL future?
Well, we'll see. He's got to bounce back. And what was funny about last year is so much can change going into the season. You think about the rhetoric last year for Carson Beck. This was a guy that was projected to be the number one pick in the draft. Now, you fast forward, Cam Ward's got his pro day today down in Miami. It looks like he's going to be the number one pick in the draft next month at Lambeau Field. So, for Carson Beck, I think this is a get right year. We've seen this with a lot of quarterbacks. Bo Nix was one of those guys, had to go out to Eugene to kind of find himself. Can Carson Beck do that in the ACC, where the week-to-week competition, with all due respect, is not going to be what he's seen over the last 2 seasons? So, yes, I think Carson Beck can play himself back into a back half of the top 32 conversation next year. I think overall will probably be a early day 2 guy, but certainly has the ability to be a first-round draft pick.
Good call. Not necessarily just about supporting cast, also scheduling, conference, all these other things factor into it. And yeah, like you said, we could see a Miami transfer quarterback, go number 1 overall in this next draft. All right, so let's go to our next ultimate burning question coming from Alvin Ferguson on Instagram. Which coach must make the college football playoff this season? Coop?
I'm going to go Brian Kelly. I went back and forth, Brian Kelly, Mario Cristobal. It's year 4. Listen, they're paying Brian Kelly a lot of money, a lot of expectations coming down from Notre Dame, and a lot of LSU fans saying, hold on, are we good with this Scott Woodward AD over there in Baton Rouge? Is this the right guy? And it seems through 3 years, he has raised the floor of the program. And what I mean by that, this has been a team that has consistently hung around 9-10 wins, which I think has been a sore spot for LSU. But this, without a doubt, on paper, is the most talented roster that I think he's ever had. You can go all the way back to his teams at Notre Dame, Cincinnati. This will be the team with Garrett Nussmeier coming back for another year, what they've done on the offensive line. And I think they have one of the top 3, top 2 most talented receiving corps in all the country. Adding Caden Durham, this is a team that's ready to explode. And then you got to look at the defense as well, what they've done there via the transfer portal. Blake Baker going into year 2 as well. So Brian Kelly, I think the new year 3 is now year 4. He's got to win in Baton Rouge, and if he doesn't make it this year, it's going to get real dicey real quick.
I got a different answer for that one, Coop. I'm going Brent Venables at Oklahoma. Kind of surprising pick, but his buyout actually lowers to $35 million after 2025. It's like 45.6 after last season, and that's actually outside of the top 10. BK's buyout is bigger at LSU. Lincoln Riley's somewhere around $80 million. Mike Norvell's buyout is huge at Florida State. Those are all guys that are on the proverbial hot seat, but Brent Venables has to win now. We still aren't sure what he is as a head coach. He had that 10-3 season, but that was sandwiched between 2 6-7 finishes. That ain't going to cut it in Norman when you have the NIL capabilities Oklahoma has and you're a perennial top 10 program all time. So not to mention the huge investment they made in the portal cycle this season with John Mateer from Washington State. They also brought in his play caller as Oklahoma's new OC. And despite the fact that OU faces one of the nation's toughest schedules, Brent Venables has to somehow manage that, get to 9 or 10 wins, and get in that playoff picture. I don't think he's fired if they miss the playoff, but this is a huge year pressure-wise for Brent Venables. And I certainly think he could be fired if they finish 6-7 again.
Coming in with the buyout figures here on the ultimate burning questions.
Buyout matters.
We love it. Yes, money definitely matters when it comes to this sort of thing. All right, let's go to our next ultimate burning question. This one comes via Instagram from Crawfish338. How confident are you that LSU can hold on to wide receiver Tristan Keys? Coop, what say you?
I like that Instagram handle
that's
there,
fun,
Crawfish338. I'm going to go with confidence meter probably around 7 or 8, and that's probably a little bit higher than it would have been for another former 5-star last year in DeCorian Moore, who ditched the Bayou Bengals, ended up signing with Dan Lanning and the Ducks up there in Eugene. You think about Tristan Keys being from Hattiesburg, Mississippi. Think about LSU and what they have with their receiver room this year. Cortez Hankton, one of the best in the country. You go all the way back to Georgia, the job that he did there. Think about this room. I mean, you got guys like Trades Green. You got guys like Barry and Brown that are coming over. Nick Anderson from Oklahoma. Aaron Anderson had a breakout year, the former Alabama transfer as well. Chris Hilton's healthy. So they have a bevy of guys, not to mention Brian Thomas Jr., Malik Neighbors. Both those guys went scorched earth as rookies in the NFL. So if you're Tristan Keys and you're looking around, LSU seems like one of those places like, okay, this place makes a lot of sense. The biggest question mark for LSU that they're going to have to answer with Tristan Keys, not right now in the spring, but when money and development and fit gets thrown around a little bit later in the year, who's going to be throwing me the ball? And Garrett Nussmeier is going to be off to the NFL. Is that going to be Michael Van Buren or somebody else? LSU is going to have to find that answer.
Yeah, that's my biggest question, Coop. Do they want to get into a bidding war with another SEC or elite program for Keys? I think LSU could possibly win that bidding war if that's the case. I mean, we've seen the Tigers pay attention to NIL now heading into Brian Kelly's 4th season. He said as much on the record last fall we're not going to outbid guys, and then they go out and have the number one portal class. So maybe they put that money toward a proven wide receiver next cycle instead of a freshman, no matter how good Tristan Keys is. But if they do get into a bidding war, I think LSU can choose to outbid somebody for that, when maybe 2 cycles ago, the Tigers might not have had that much money.
I will say this, Brad. Tristan Keys, for whatever it's worth, is my favorite player in this class. And you think about him, you look over the last 2 cycles, the type of receivers that have come out. We got the generational conversation everybody knows here in Jeremiah Smith. You think about guys like Ryan Williams, Cam Coleman, Ryan Wingo, TJ Moore, Brian Wesco. You go down the list. Last 2 years have been absolutely loaded. Corian Moore. Out of all those guys, Tristan Keys would probably be the 4th best receiver. And I feel pretty good about Ryan Williams, Jeremiah Smith, Cam Coleman, all those guys hearing their name pretty early a couple years from now in the NFL draft. So I love Tristan Keys. I love the way that he's wired, very, very mature in the way that he approaches the game of football. So if you're LSU, probably still has a little money left over from the Bryce Underwood fiasco. I think it would be money well spent.
I love that you mentioned last year with Corian Moore, the number 1 wide receiver in that class. This Tristan Keys is the number 1 wide receiver in this class. So I'm sure that the Bayou Bengal fans are a little nervous about holding on to this one, because he was committed to Corian Moore was for 10 months last cycle before flipping to Oregon. So still a lot of time left to go into that early signing period. We got another ultimate burning question for you from @Irish in Buffalo, also via Instagram. How much of the blame for Georgia's off-the-field issues is on Kirby Smart? This, of course, in response to 2 more players suspended late last week after driving-related incidents. Feels like deja vu all over again. Brad, how much of this is on Kirby?
Look, Kirby Smart's not behind the wheel of these Hellcats, but he's the leader of this program, and it's his responsibility to try and stop his players becoming a public safety danger to the city of Athens. When we've seen, 26 arrests since January 2023, and they've all been speed and traffic related. At some point, the buck stops with one of the college football's highest paid coaches. Look, I mean, we worship this guy for his 2 titles the last 4 seasons. He's put more players in the NFL draft the last 5 cycles than anybody nationally now that Nick Saban has retired. But now it's, time to ask Kirby Smart these tough questions. How do you put a stop to this just nuisance that's happening in Athens with these speed-related arrests? And I think part of the issue is, you have 18 and 19-year-old rookie or second or third-year drivers getting behind these 180-mile-an-hour sports cars, and that's a major problem. So I do think it's time to start, as national media analysts, asking Kirby, man, what's up? This has to end soon.
He's arguably the best coach in college football, but it does not excuse him from criticism, which you mentioned it. You mentioned the stats there in terms of how many players have gotten citations or been arrested since January 2023. And one of those things that happened was a fatality in 2023. And then you look at what happened after. So we always talked about it. We talked about it in Washington. One of the greatest people I ever worked with, people, not coaches, Chris Peterson, always used to say about the players and the individuals in that locker room. They either meet the standard of what you want as people for your locker room, or they do not. And if they don't meet the standard, then you move on in a different direction. And at some point, either in the identification process or when you had them on campus, you failed those people. That's exactly what's being happening right now in Athens. You think about these kids that are making really poor decisions consistently. And that's happened over the last 2 years that we have seen this. And you said it, Brad. He's not behind the wheel, but he is the guy that is the leader of the program. And something is not getting through to these guys at the end of the day that this is completely unacceptable. I mean, for heaven's sakes, make them ride bikes, take a scooter, do whatever you got to do at the end of the day. Get them an Uber, because we're not talking about missing football games. We're talking about people's lives. So how many times does this have to happen for it to really get the message through that it's unacceptable? And that's where it is. And I will say this. I'm sure Kirby Smart understands that, but they have to continue to evaluate why the message is not getting through, because it is completely unacceptable and it continues to happen, which means, hey, something from head coach to the rest of the personnel on Georgia's staff to their players, the example is not being made that this is something that can continue to happen.
Yeah, we've seen dozens of power coaches. Almost every program nationally now has a zero tolerance policy toward domestic violence related issues. So why not have the same thing toward speed issues that harm others, not only players, but other citizens on the road? This is becoming a pretty much an epidemic now at Georgia because it's happening so often during the offseason. It's happening during fall camp. It's happened during the season. And as you mentioned, Coop, it has resulted in loss of life. I mean, that's the red alert stop button for all of this once that happens. So it's time Georgia starts taking this a lot more seriously as they do some other, more personal and serious related arrest.
That was 2 years ago. Since then, 21 players have had some trouble with the law as it pertains to driving-related incidents, which, as you said, usually it's like, what, does somebody have to die for something like this to raise your attention? And that did happen. But something you said, Brad, I thought was interesting is, the age group that they're in and NIL, and they have more money and everything. Georgia's not the only place where that's happening. I think, how much does that concern you that it's not isolated at Georgia, but man, the problem is way bigger there than anywhere else across the country?
I mean, give these guys a V6 Mustang. You don't have to go 180 miles an hour down a road and completely lose control of a car. That's what these players are doing. They're speed. Some have had speed racing incidents. I mean, it's very unsafe for the citizens of Athens right now and some of these players. I mean, if I'm the parents of a 4- or 5-star athlete who signs with Kirby Smart, I want some, knowledge of the situation. Is my son going to get behind a V8 horsepower Challenger or Charger? I mean, what is he going to be as far as safety concerns in Athens? And I would be somewhat worried because now we've seen more than 24 arrests for the same thing. Kirby Smart has said at media days on the record that it has been addressed internally, and they've had guys on campus talk about, slowing down. I mean, it's whatever Kirby Smart has done, it's obviously not getting through to players. And through the NIL faction at Georgia, they've got to stop giving the keys to these high-powered engines.
Yeah, I think ultimately at the end of the day, for Kirby Smart, he's in a situation where the expectations are incredibly high in Athens, right? And talent equals tolerance. Smoke talked about that a couple weeks ago on this show, but when you're talking about these type of players, unfortunately, sometimes when these guys get in trouble, you're looking at your roster and you're saying, well, can't lose this guy, right? If we're trying to make a run at the national championship, then I need to have my 6th, my 7th offensive lineman. So what does that look like? And ultimately, how does that factor into your decisions when it comes to a disciplinary conduct? And I think that's the point right now that I think Kirby Smart and his staff that I trust are trying to figure out and navigate and ultimately trying to prevent how this continues to happen and how do they find a way to stop it. So, like I said, I don't doubt the fact that Kirby Smart cares and him and his staff are working around the clock to try to figure out a way to prevent this. Something is not happening, and I think they're at the point where they have to look at a lot of different strategies for how they can go forward to prevent something like this from happening, reoccurring in the future.
Yeah, ultimately it's up for debate how much of this falls on the head coach, Kirby Smart. But what's not up for debate is whatever's been done is clearly not enough because this does continue to happen. Brad Crawford, thank you for being here for the Ultimate Burning Questions. Some fun ones, some heavy ones. That's why we bring you on. You can handle it all. We so appreciate it. And thank you so much for watching the Ultimate College Football Show. Hit that like button on the way out and make sure to come join us every Monday and Wednesday right here on the 247 Sports YouTube channel. See you Wednesday.